Hey folks, it's Fernando doing our video for the More Survivalists, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Zero Tolerance ZT0561, which is this beautiful knife that I have here. 0560, 0561 is basically the same thing. The difference is the scale, color. The 0561, this one has this dark tan or brown G10 scale. The 0560 has the same thing, only with a black G10 scale. There's also the black wash finish version, but basically these are all the same knife. It's definitely not a new knife. It's been around for quite some time. I know I kept my eye on it for many years now. Always wanted one, but always had something else that needed to be taken care of first. But you know, it's, at least in my case, for me, it was one of those grail knives that I've always wanted to have. And I'll be completely honest, the aesthetic aspect of this knife just does it for me. I think it's beautiful. I think it's the best looking folder out there. You may agree with me or not, and sure, there are very nice looking, I actually have some here which we're going to be taking a look in a second that look gorgeous as well. But this, you know, if you would ask me which is the best looking folder, this would be it for me. Now, this is the Modern Survivalist. I'm always all about function over form. Always will prefer something that works well rather than just looks well, right? The thing is that sometimes you have a great knife like this one, which also happens to look outstanding, and you know, why not? I mean, if you can pull that off, by all means. And they do it here. It's a Rick Hinder design. Rick Hinder does know what he's doing regarding knives. Is it perfect in every sense? Well, there's things that could have been done maybe different, better, and we'll get into that in a second. But you know, it has a well-earned reputation as a solid, good knife. No complaints there. Let's go quickly through some of the specs regarding this blade. This is a 3.75 inch blade, and this is Elmax steel. Elmax is one of these super steels. Basically, it's a steel that keeps its edge for a very long time. You know, it's not going to be requiring to be sharpened nearly as much as some of your more run-of-the-mill carbon steels, a 1095 steel, which is still excellent, but this is going to be one of those super steels. You usually pay more for Elmax steel, and no exception here. Now, since we're talking about the steel specifically, one of the problems with the 0560, 0561, especially at first, with the first production ones, was problems with the heat treatment. Some guys, and you find these on YouTube, ended up with knives that had problems with heat treatment. The edge would fold, would chip, would even break, fail catastrophically. Failing catastrophically means that chunks of the blade would come off, it snaps. That happened with some of the first versions. Now, keeping it honest and real as well, it was certain lemons, as we call them. It wasn't a standard for everyone that got some of the first versions of the knife. This was back in 2012 or so, all right? Maybe some of those were still floating around, but keeping it honest, most guys were extremely happy with the performance of their Elmax steel, especially in this knife like this, later production one. This is a more a newer version. You basically did not hear, I at least have not heard of anyone having a problem with the heat treatment of their Elmax steel, and it's performing as outstanding as you would expect. Okay, it's, you know, premium steel, or super steels as they're sometimes called. It is a little bit of a heavy knife, I guess, if that's a thing. It's 5.8 ounces. I really don't notice at all anything regarding, you know, comparing it with another big zero tolerance knife like this one. This is a 0200, kind of maybe some of the same blade length, or at least very close to it. Yeah, these are, you know, sturdy, heavy knives. It's no secret. At least for me, this is more of a medium-sized knife, and weight has never been a problem with anything that I've had clipped to my pocket. I mean, I have my multi-tool in my pocket all the time, and I just forget about it until I actually need it. Same thing with any folder, especially something, at least in my case, for me, I start noticing maybe a little bit more when I have something of a 5-inch blade, 6-inch blade folder that kind of gets big. Even then, it just forget about it eventually. So, as I was saying, you have quality construction all over. This is made in the United States, and you have titanium 3D machine scale, which incorporates the locking bar. And one of the ways in which you know this is a newer version of this knife is the steel insert. You see that screw there? That screw basically shows that you have a steel insert. One of the other complaints that people had at first was that the blade, the locking bar, was sticking. That usually happens when you have titanium to steel contact. For example, in the 0550, that's exactly what you have. You have your locking bar, right, making contact there with the steel of the blade. This, it's actually a chemistry thing. Titanium simply bonds and sticks to steel. Some people have a problem with that. I not so much. You know, actually, I would even prefer it a little bit. I understand that on one side it's good when it sticks, when you simply want that extra, you know, reassurance, so as to put it some way. Okay, and you want to make sure that nothing is slipping out of place or anything like that. On the other hand, it's harder to unlock, especially when you use this knife hard, you know, as you should be able to, giving the strength inherent to it. Then it becomes a little bit harder to unlock. Okay, also happens that after years of serious use, the titanium will start wearing out, because it's softer than the actual steel that you have here, so it starts wearing out and needs to be sent back to zero tolerance for maintenance sooner rather than if you had a steel insert. With a steel insert, you have steel to steel contact, and first it makes it easier to unlock, then it's not going to be wearing nearly as fast, and eventually when you're 80 years old and it wore out, you can send this back and have this little piece replaced rather than having to change the entire beautiful titanium scale. You have an overextension stop there, here, and I think you also have it in the insert itself, so as to prevent. One of the things that I noticed is that the tension here is pretty strong. It's quite powerful, actually. It's very strong. Again, this is all things that have been improved from the earlier versions that people had issues with. Some folks would just bang the blade against a table, which sure you're not supposed to, but yeah, come on, this is a hard-used knife, right? So if you bang it against a wooden table, you know, nothing too silly so as to not mess the blade up. But some people noticed that it just jumped out of the locking position, and that's no good. So obviously what they did, they increased the tension of the locking bar considerably, so you feel it pull back very strongly. I don't have anything like that here in my 0630. It's much softer. This one has never came out of the locking position in my case, you know. Haven't abused it really, but no problems with ordinary common use, just stays in place. Is it the strongest lock in the planet? No. The frame lock by design, it's not the strongest there is. It is definitely strong enough for a hard use folder. Keeping it honest here as well. You should not have a problem with your lock, all right? Come on. There's probably other things that will fail before the locking mechanism disengages. You also have a pretty sizable flipper here, and this does take a little bit of breaking in. I actually had to flip it like 1,000 times, literally like 1,000 times, because the dent there, that little ball that falls into place when the knife is closed, it's pretty stiff and actually quite hard. Another thing that I noticed is that this knife is not designed so as to be used with a thumb stud. Even when you use it, what happens is, you see there, with a flipper, it has this jimping. I don't know why people are going nuts about jimping, putting it everywhere. Many times it just screw things up. What happens is with the thumb stud, when you pull it, it just catches a little bit of your skin there and actually bites into it. Completely uncalled for. Why do you need jimping here? I mean, when you completely deploy it, it's on this other side. So what is the point of the jimping here? I'm not going to be putting my finger there either. And when the knife is closed, I'm not using it in any way either. This makes absolutely no sense other than looking good. I understand looking good. I get it. I think, as I said before, it is beautiful. But this actually is sacrificing function for form. I'm not into that. Actually, this this makes more sense to actually remove it so as to use it. Now, the people of Zero Tolerance, in all honesty, they said that it was intended to be used as a flipper, okay, used like that, and it works beautifully as in that way. And this was more intended to be like a stop, right? Maybe they should have put an actual stop pin on the inside, but this basically rests against the scale so as to have a little bit of extra strength, correct? And yes, it does have that function. As a flipper though, yeah, it is very fast. You have a 4-position pocket clip as well, and it's a deep carry one, which works very well. And some of these other ones, well, you have a deep pocket clip here as well in the 05. This is also a beautiful knife as well. Come on, the 0550, great little knife. Not so much here with the 0200, this one, but is it that much of a big deal? I prefer a deep carry pocket clip, but not a problem there. It has a KVT ball bearing system instead of a traditional bronze washers, which in theory make it faster to deploy. That's at least in theory, and it is true that once you disengage the lock, it just has no friction whatsoever. So the ball bearings, you actually do feel them. Now the thing is, with the tension that this thing has, so as to make it, remember what I was saying before, some of the earlier versions had problems disengaging. With this one, what happens is that because it's so strong, the locking bar has such good tension, and I'm not going to be complaining about that because I prefer to have a secure knife rather than having something that, I don't have problem with my little thumb here. If it's a few more pounds, no problem. I just disengage it. I much rather have that rather than this disengaging when that's not my intended, when I'm not trying to do. So not complaining there, but it kind of defeats the purpose of having ball bearings, right? Because as you see, it does not fall. You see? Ball bearings, KVT, fancy and all, it just does not fall into position, which actually with my 0560, it's pretty much the same thing. It has enough tension. It's actually even a little bit softer and swifter than the ball bearing stuff, and this is traditional washers. Now the thing is, my thing with this is that the typical washer system is actually sturdier and stronger than these ball bearings. The ball bearings are not as bad as some people think they are. They are going to be wearing into the titanium after years and years of use. It's actually going to be getting stronger as it digs into that titanium, and so as to mess up this knife, you would have to do some serious prying, some serious abuse, well beyond anything reasonable. Even then, okay, I'm all about being unreasonable if that's ever needed so as to save your skin. Even if you have to do that, it's going to be holding. The thing is, it's going to be holding a little bit less than this mechanism here, than the traditional, okay, washers here or in the 550. All right, the 550 is a more solid knife when torsion, when side pressure is applied because of that. It's not in terms of excellent steel, both have excellent steel. The scales are also sturdy as hell. The thing is that those KVT ball bearings are not going to be as solid. If you're going to be opening crates with this knife all day long, after some time, you will find that it has a little bit more, play, a little bit more give there. The knife is going to be working perfectly well, but that's more likely to happen than with some other systems. I mean, again, it's one of those things that I really just wanted to have. It's a knife that, keeping it real, I don't see myself using it much. I see this, it's going to be in my collection, and I don't have any problem with anyone getting this knife as to use it. If you're going to be getting your 0560 or 0561 and using it all day long as your EDC knife, you are going to be very well served by it, correct? You should do a lot of research before buying anything. I know I do it, and I recommend doing the exact same thing. Before I bought this, I looked into it for years. I read some bad experiences with it. I read several, most of them very good ones, which kind of level the opinion. And eventually, I formed an opinion, which I'm sharing with you folks, which is the few bad things, and I'm including some people that I respect the hell out of, like Cliff Stamp, who has a very poor opinion of the 0560, and I completely understand what he was complaining about, because it is in fact true. The problem that he had with his specific knife, and I think he mentioned that in some part, his specific knife had an awful problem with the heat treatment. It was one of those lemons, earlier ones, at least the ones that I know of, that chipped and dulled faster than average or even mediocre quality steel. That should not be happening with Elmax steel, not in any shape or form. So if you one of my opinion basically would be this, guys: if you are like me and you had one of these in sight for some time, and I'm going to be leaving, as always, the link below in case you want it, because that always works great for me as well. It is available in Amazon, although the price it's pretty fluctuating badly. If you want one of these as your EDC, I would say go for it. And if you buy it and eventually you have any problem with it, if you start banging it against a table and it disengages, you just send it back. It should not be doing that. It should be as stiff as this one, very strong, and engaging up to... In mine, it's engaging pretty much all of the steel insert is engaging. Pretty much, I'd say 80% of the steel insert is engaging there, and that's exactly what you want. I think it was, again, mostly a thing of some of the earlier versions. If you have any issue with it, send it back. I think that if you buy these today, chances are you will not have a problem with it, unless you somewhat end up with one of the first versions, which is possible, I guess, if you buy it maybe in one of the forums. Buying one of the from one of the dealers today, you shouldn't have an issue with it at all. And it's great. You could customize it. You could put different scales. I've seen guys change the clip, the screws, and they end up with beautiful looking knives. I've seen some of those in EDC forums. I get it completely. I'm happy enough with my 0630, right, with this one. I think this is better looking knife, nice looking knife, which just gives me everything that I want, and I especially like the wave feature. It really grew in me. I just love the way it snaps out of the pocket. It wasn't always the case. At first it seemed gimmicky to me, and if you had asked me a few years ago, I would have said no way, no. I'd much rather have a typical folder that just opens normally and more securely. After quite a bit of time of using it, I'm happy enough with it. But if you want to go with something like this, you are going to be very well served by it. Is it the knife to beat the crap out of, mess up the blade all day long? If you're going to be using it as a as a junk knife, maybe you need something else. I mean, heck, maybe you need a fixed blade knife. Maybe you need something like this. This is, whenever I have to beat on a knife bad, all right, and I really don't care if I mess up the edge or even break it, if it comes down to that, I get a $5 knife, which is what this Hultaford exactly is. Right, it's carbon steel, it's very solid, it's very sharp as well. In spite of how bad it looks, I sharpen it properly, keeps, you know, a very sharp edge. And it is a fixed blade knife. Fixed blades, there's a saying that a folding knife is a broken knife. I don't quite agree with that, because a folding knife is simply a folding knife. It's a knife which has its advantages, which means being able to be carried in your pocket, and it has its limitations. Is it the frame lock as bad as some people say it is? No, not by a long shot. And I'm a guy that is very much, most of the knives that I have are these guys here, cold steel knives, famous for the triad lock, which is the strongest locking mechanism created by man, and you know, all that kind of stuff. Sure, the triad lock is very strong, extremely strong. Now, that doesn't mean that the entire knife is perfect either. And keeping it real as well, you simply cannot compare the material, the quality of the steel in my Voyager here with my zero tolerance. Elmax steel, properly heat treated as it should be, is, you know, way beyond the performance that you can have from a $30-40 knife. You cannot have Elmax knife for $30-40 because the steel itself costs more than that, and usually it's attached to a better looking knife which has more expensive materials as well and more expensive design, people involved in it and all that kind of stuff, and not being manufactured in Taiwan but made in the United States. All those things do have a price. And whenever, you know, I love things that are overbuilt, strong, and that you have to understand that the knife, it's not only the locking mechanism, it's the blade as well, it's the handle as well. How strong is everything in your knife? Okay, because I've seen knives, and yes, I'm talking about cold steel here, that have a very strong locking mechanism, and what actually ends up breaking is the blade. All right. If the blade breaks, then you still have a broken knife. Still, it did still fail, catastrophically so. In this case, you have a beefier blade, you have more expensive steel being used, and it's going to be performing better than your AUS 8 steel or your 1095 steel. Okay, if you're going to be using this knife a lot, and you're not intentionally trying to destroy it for making a video, which I love destruction knife videos, it gives me an idea of how far you can push it before it snaps. That's all great, but I'm not going to be doing that on purpose with anything that I'm honestly using in real life. I like the idea of knowing those limits in case I ever have to use it beyond that. I know, you know, if I have to, can I cut my way out of, that's something that I always think about, you know, can I cut my way through a dry wall with my folding knife? Yes. With your zero tolerance 0560, you are able to cut your way through a wall, a dry wall, if it's ever needed. Are you going to be probably having a little bit more of play here because of that KVT thing that I was talking about before? Probably. Still not going to be the end of the world. I mean, still achieving the objective, and it's not the kind of thing that I plan on doing every single day. If you're going to be using this knife for what a 4-inch folder is intended for, because of the steel involved and how long it holds its edge and how easy it is to resharpen, it's going to be better for you than something like your Voyager, which simply doesn't have that quality of steel, in spite of having the stronger triad locking mechanism. So it's, you know, and again, when people complain about locks and this one and that one, I always go back to my trusty Leatherman Charge, which has a very thin, very narrow locking mechanism. What was this? Completely forgot. Frame lock? No, like a liner lock. It has a very thin liner lock. All right, you actually see it, how thin it is, and it never let me down. And I've used this knife to bits. I've used this knife more than all this stuff put together. All right, well, maybe this one is something that I would abuse with more confidence. Again, fixed blade, come on. But within the limitations of what this knife is capable of, I pushed it pretty far and it never let me down. So if this thin little liner lock is not letting me down, and this is again the perfect example of how nicer steel makes a difference. With a S30V steel, and by the way, Elmex is clearly better, with S30V steel, I have a knife that holds its edge very well for a long period of time. If I had cheaper, good enough but more humble carbon steel, I would have to sharpen this twice as much. I'm not kidding. I mean, I see that with, think of a Victorinox knife. It's a great knife. Victorinox are fantastic, but the steel quality, even though more than serviceable, it's not going to be holding on like super steel. This is the kind of thing that you notice the difference after using it, and if you know anything about knives, you notice how it holds the edge much longer than some of the more average steels. So unless you're actually using it for something that probably you should be using a fixed blade for, especially when it's like daily stuff, you're using it for carving, for opening crates all day long, yeah, go with a fixed blade. Probably you need a pry bar instead. I know that if I ever have to pry seriously to open something, there's a good chance I'm going to be snapping this blade. No chance, that I'm going to be snapping this blade with the same amount of force that this one makes it fail. All right, even with a KVT rolling thing there. All right, so. Folks, yeah, just the chance to talk a little bit about knives, share ideas and such. Let me know what you think. If you have a different opinion or you have any insight that you'd like to share, let me know. One more thing. If you are liking this knife as much as I do, and you're thinking of getting it in Amazon, again, link is there below. There's also a slightly smaller one, which is the 0566. Yes, 0566. There's a black wash version that looks fantastic. It's pretty much the same aesthetics as this knife, slightly smaller. It has a 3.25 inch blade, which is just a tad smaller. It's a lot cheaper. I think it's going for 160 bucks, so it's quite a bit cheaper, and you have pretty much almost the same looks as this one for half the value, or maybe more these days, and you have fantastic steel. You still have Elmex steel. You have I don't think you have titanium. I think it's a steel frame lock, which is serviceable as titanium and then some. And it even has the assisted opening, the fast deployment system used by Kershaw. I think it's called the Speed Safe, which it has a flipper, but as soon as you put a little bit of pressure, it just jumps with the help of a spring out of position in open. So again, the 0566, I'm going to be leaving the link below as well in case you're interested, but that's also a knife that's worthy of consideration. Folks, it's going to be all for now. Remember to subscribe. Take care. See you on our next video.